Imagine sitting across a table from the man you have loved for 11 years. The man who held your hand at your mother's funeral. The man who got down on one knee in the rain outside a restaurant in Buckhead because he said he couldn't wait another second to ask you. The man who kissed your forehead every single morning before you left for your 12-hour nursing shift and told you, without fail, that you were his entire world. Now imagine that in the time it took you to reach for a pen, your entire life cracked open. Not with a fight, not with a confession, not with a phone call in the middle of the night, but with a piece of paper that slipped out of a folder, and a number on that paper that didn't belong, and a silence inside you so loud it drowned out everything in the room, the notary's small talk, the air conditioning humming, the scratch of your husband's pen on the page beside you. That is exactly where Diane Carter found herself on a Thursday afternoon in April 2022, sitting across a table from Marcus Webb, her husband of 9 years, the father of her 2 children, the man she had built everything with. And in that moment, in that quiet, unremarkable office, she realized that the life she thought she was signing for had never actually been hers. This is Diane's story, and I am telling you right now, you are not ready for how it ends. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now let's get into it. Diane Carter grew up in Decatur, Georgia, a suburb of Atlanta with a rich Black community, deep church roots, and the kind of neighborhoods where everybody knew everybody's grandmother. She was the second of 4 children raised by a single mother named Gloria Carter, a woman who worked as a hospital administrator by day and took on weekend cleaning shifts to make sure all 4 of her children had what they needed. Gloria was not a woman who complained. She was a woman who prepared. Every Sunday night, she laid out her children's clothes for the week. Every morning before school, she reminded them of 3 things. Do your work, tell the truth, and never let anybody make you feel like you are less than what you are. Diane absorbed every word. She was the kind of student who studied not because she was afraid of failure, but because she understood. The way children who grow up watching their mothers work 2 jobs always understand. That education was the one thing nobody could take from her. She graduated from Southwest DeKalb High School with honors, went on to Georgia State University on a partial academic scholarship, and graduated from their nursing program in 2004. By the time she was 29, Diane Carter was a charge nurse at Grady Memorial Hospital, one of the largest and most demanding public hospitals in the entire Southeast. She managed a floor of 18 patients, supervised a team of 12 nurses, and did it with the kind of calm authority that made new doctors nervous and veteran doctors grateful. She had her own apartment, her own car paid off, a savings account she had been building since her first paycheck at 22. She did not come from wealth. She manufactured it, quietly and deliberately, the way Gloria had taught her. And by her early 30s, Diane Carter was, by every measurable standard, a woman who had built something real. What she had not built yet, what she was still looking for, was a partner. And that brings us to the summer of 2010. A cookout in Stone Mountain, Georgia, hosted by her college friend Brianna. Paper plates, grilled chicken, a speaker in the backyard playing old-school R&B. Diane almost didn't go. She had a double shift the following morning, and she was tired in the way that nurses in their early 30s who have been on their feet for 6 years are tired. But Brianna had been insisting for weeks, and so Diane went. Marcus Webb was standing near the drinks table when Diane arrived. He was 32, tall, with an easy smile and the kind of confidence that did not announce itself. It just occupied the room. He worked in logistics sales, managed a regional territory for a mid-sized supply chain company, and he had come to the cookout with a mutual friend named Derek. He introduced himself to Diane with a firm handshake, and within 10 minutes they were deep in a conversation about Atlanta traffic, Georgia politics, and whether Outkast was the greatest rap group of all time. Marcus said yes. Diane said the question wasn't even worth debating, and Marcus laughed, a real laugh, not a performance, and said she was probably right. He asked for her number before she left. He texted that same evening. He called 2 days later. He planned their first date a week after that, dinner at a restaurant in Virginia Highland, a neighborhood in Atlanta known for its quiet streets and good food. He made a reservation. He was already there when she arrived. He stood up when she walked in. And when she ordered her coffee at the end of the meal, he told the waiter, "Oat milk, 1 sugar." He had remembered from a passing comment she had made during their phone call 3 days earlier. Diane noticed. And Diane, who had learned to measure people carefully, thought, this one pays attention. Marcus Webb had grown up in Marietta, Georgia, a suburb on the northwest side of Atlanta, mostly white, mostly middle class. His father, Robert Webb, was a contractor who had built a steady small business over 30 years. His mother, Karen Webb, had spent most of her career as an administrator at a local elementary school. They were a functional family, Sunday dinners, church at Christmas and Easter, a fishing trip every summer. Marcus was the older of 2 sons. His brother, Tyler, worked in real estate. By all visible accounts, the Webb family was unremarkable in the best possible way. Comfortable, stable, normal. What Diane would not discover until years later was that the Webb family had its own architecture of silence. The things that were felt but never said. The opinions that circulated in private that would never survive daylight. But in 2010 and 2011, as Diane and Marcus moved through the early stages of their relationship, none of that was visible to her. What was visible was a man who showed up, who communicated. Who, when they had their first real disagreement, a stupid argument about money and planning, the kind every couple has, sat down with her the following morning and said, "I don't want to fight. I want to fix it. Tell me what you need." Diane had dated men before Marcus, men who disappeared for days after arguments, men who made her feel like her standards were inconveniences, men who admired her success with their mouths and resented it in their behavior. Marcus was different, or so it seemed. And so when he proposed in March 2013, at a restaurant they had been to on their first anniversary, a little off script because it had started raining and he had planned to do it outside. But he got down on one knee right there in the entrance in front of the hostess stand and every table near the window. Diane said yes before he finished the sentence. They married in October 2013. The ceremony was at a venue in Buckhead. Diane wore her grandmother's pearls. Gloria cried from the 3rd row. The reception went until midnight. By every account from every person who was there, it was a beautiful wedding, a happy one. What nobody in that room knew, including Diane, was that Marcus Webb had not come into that marriage alone. Her name was Tanya Briggs. She was 30 years old in 2013, white, and she had been in a relationship with Marcus Webb since 2009, 1 year before Marcus met Diane at the Stone Mountain Cookout. Tanya lived in Smyrna, Georgia, a suburb about 22 minutes west of where Diane and Marcus would eventually settle. She worked as an office manager for a dental practice. She drove a silver Honda CR-V. She had a social media presence that was pleasant and ordinary. Brunch photos, sunsets, birthday posts for her friends. What her social media did not show was Marcus. Not once, because Marcus had asked her, from very early in their relationship, to keep things private. He had told Tanya he was intensely private about his personal life, that his family was old-fashioned and he did not want to deal with the attention. Tanya, who loved him, agreed. When Marcus told Tanya he had met someone, Diane, and that things had gotten serious, Tanya was devastated. They had a period of real rupture. But Marcus, who was skilled at managing people the way skilled salespeople always are, worked his way back. He told Tanya that the situation with Diane was complicated, that his family had expectations he was struggling with, that he cared about Tanya in a way that he could not simply walk away from. He told her what she needed to hear. And Tanya, who had her own vulnerabilities, her own reasons for holding on, chose to believe him. By the time Marcus and Diane returned from their honeymoon in Cancun in October 2013, Marcus had made Tanya a different kind of commitment. Not marriage, he was careful about that, but stability, a financial arrangement. He would take care of her. He would be there. And the money, the steady, reliable monthly transfers that began appearing in Tanya's account starting November 2013 confirmed that he meant it. $1,800 every month on the 3rd. He paid for it from a personal account that Diane did not know existed. He funded that account through a combination of cash withdrawals from their joint finances. Reimbursements from his company expense account that he had structured carefully enough to avoid immediate scrutiny. And over time, as Diane's income grew and their shared finances expanded, direct transfers that he categorized in their budget software as home maintenance, car insurance, and miscellaneous bills. Diane was a nurse, not an accountant. She trusted him with the household finances because he had insisted on managing them. He had framed it early in their marriage as wanting to take something off her plate, and Diane, who was working 50-hour weeks at Grady and coming home to 2 small children, had accepted that arrangement with gratitude. She reviewed the broad strokes. She saw the savings growing, the bills being paid, the mortgage on their rental being covered. She did not audit line by line. She had no reason to. Marcus had engineered it that way. By 2018, 5 years into the marriage, the transfers had grown. Tanya had moved into a house in Smyrna, a 3-bedroom with a back porch and a yard. The lease was in her name, but Marcus covered the rent. By 2019, they were not renting anymore. Tanya's house had been purchased. The down payment came through a combination of money Marcus had been quietly accumulating in his separate account, including, and this detail would become especially significant later, a portion of the $45,000 inheritance that Diane received when Gloria passed away from a stroke in March 2019. Gloria Carter, who had pressed uniforms at midnight so her daughter would have something, who had saved for Diane's wedding since Diane was 16, who had told her daughter every morning that she was nobody's consolation prize. A portion of her life's savings, the legacy she left, had been funneled, without Diane's knowledge, into a mortgage for a house that belonged to another woman. That detail, when it later came out, was the one that broke people who heard this story. That was the one that made even the most composed people in Diane's circle go completely silent. By 2020, Tanya had 2 sons. The older boy was born in 2014, the year after Marcus and Diane's wedding. His name was Connor James Briggs. His middle name was James. Marcus's middle name was also James. The younger boy arrived in 2016. He was named Ryan. Marcus was present at both births. He had told Diane he was on work trips both times. She had sent him voice messages asking him to come home safe. And through all of it, through 11 years of weekend absences and late work calls and a household budget that never quite added up the way Diane thought it should, Marcus Webb maintained the marriage, not neglectfully. That is what makes this story so difficult to process. He was not a cold or distant husband. He showed up to Jordan's school plays. He took Nia to the park on Saturday mornings. He planned anniversary trips. He remembered the oat milk and 1 sugar. He was, by the accounts of everyone who knew them, a good husband to Diane Carter. That was the performance, and he had been performing it for 9 years without a single visible crack. Until April 2022. The decision to buy a house had been building for a couple of years. They had been renting a home in a suburb of Atlanta, a comfortable 4-bedroom that they had outgrown emotionally, if not physically. Jordan was 7. Nia was 5. Diane had recently been promoted to nursing supervisor, her highest salary to date. Marcus had received a raise of his own. The timing, financially, felt right. And Diane, who had spent her whole career helping people in crisis, whose entire professional life was about stability and care, wanted her children to have a home that was permanently theirs. She found the house herself, 4 bedrooms, a big kitchen, a backyard with a magnolia tree that bloomed white every spring. The neighborhood had good schools, a community pool, and a 4th of July block party that the neighbors had apparently been running since 2008. Diane fell in love with it on the first walkthrough. She negotiated the asking price down by $11,000. She organized the paperwork, the inspections, the insurance quotes. She brought her 800 credit score, 15 years in the building, to the table and used it like the asset it was. Marcus contributed. He signed where he was told to sign. He nodded at the right moments. He shook the realtor's hand and called it a great deal. And on a Thursday afternoon in April 2022, they sat down with a notary named Carol at a title company in Dunwoody to close on the house. Papers everywhere. Signatures and initials on every other page. Diane had brought a folder with their documents organized in labeled tabs. Marcus had brought a folder too. The kind of generic manila folder a person grabs last minute from a desk drawer. The kind without a label. The kind with too many things shoved inside it that should probably be organized but never are. Carol stepped out of the room to make a copy of their IDs. And in that moment, 22 years of mortgage closing small talk having primed Carol to always step out at that exact point, Marcus's folder slipped from the edge of the table. Papers scattered across the surface between them. Diane reached over to help collect them. She was, above all things, someone who helped. It was practically a reflex. And as she gathered the pages, not reading them, just collecting them, her eyes caught a number. A routing number. An account number. A transaction history she did not recognize. She looked at it for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked at Marcus, who was checking his phone and had not noticed. Then she looked back at the paper. $2,200 every month, to an account she had never seen. Going back from what she could see of the date range, at least 4 years on this particular statement alone. Carol came back. Diane set the papers down on Marcus's side of the table. She picked up her pen. She kept signing. And while she was signing the most significant financial document of her married life, her left hand, the one not holding the pen, reached into her purse, took out her phone and photographed that bank statement. Clean, clear, time-stamped. Marcus was laughing at something Carol said. Diane smiled along. And when they walked out of that office as homeowners, Diane took Marcus's hand in the parking lot and said the house was going to be perfect. She meant it, just not in the way he understood. That night, after Jordan and Nia were asleep and Marcus had gone to bed early, a Monday habit he had maintained for years that Diane had always found endearing, she sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and the photo on her phone. She had the account number. She had his email address and the recovery question answers she had absorbed over 11 years of being his wife. It took her 40 minutes to access the account. What she found inside it rewrote 9 years of her marriage in under an hour. The transfers had started in November 2013, 1 month after their wedding. $1,800 at first, then $2,000 by 2015, then $2,200 from 2018 onward, always on the 3rd of the month, always to the same account. Over 9 years, the total transferred was $247,000. And that number did not include the untraceable cash withdrawals, the manipulated expense reimbursements, or the portion of Gloria's inheritance that had been redirected before it ever fully landed in their joint account. Diane cross-referenced the account number against property records she accessed through the Fulton County Public Database, a skill she had picked up years ago when she and Marcus had briefly considered buying an investment property. The account was linked to a name, Tanya Briggs, the address, a house in Smyrna, Georgia, 22 minutes away. She pulled it up on Google Maps, Street View, a nice house. Newer than the one Diane had just signed for, 2 cars in the driveway, a basketball hoop by the garage. A welcome mat on the front porch. Diane sat in her kitchen for a long time after that, not crying, not shaking, thinking. And then she opened a new document on her laptop and started building a file. Over the next 3 weeks, Diane Carter lived 2 simultaneous lives with a precision that, in retrospect, people who knew her said was completely consistent with who she had always been. During the day, she was the wife. She made school lunches. She attended Jordan's soccer practice. She sat across from Marcus at dinner and listened to his stories about difficult clients and conference calls and a new account he was trying to close. She was present. She was warm. She gave him absolutely nothing. After the children were in bed, she worked. She found Sandra Okafor through a colleague at Grady Memorial, a fellow nurse whose sister had used Sandra during a custody dispute 2 years earlier. Sandra was a former DeKalb County Sheriff's deputy who had left law enforcement in 2018 to open her own private investigation firm. She was thorough, discreet, and according to the reviews on her firm's website, she found things that did not want to be found. Diane met with her on a Tuesday morning, presented the bank statement photo and her initial research, and hired her that afternoon. Sandra confirmed the core details within 5 days. Tanya Briggs, 38 years old, had been in a relationship with Marcus Webb for over 12 years. She had 2 sons, Connor, 8, and Ryan, 6. The house in Smyrna had been purchased in 2019 with a down payment that Sandra traced, through a chain of account transfers, directly back to funds that had moved through Marcus's hidden account. Funds that originated from Diane and Marcus's shared finances, including a transfer made 3 weeks after Gloria Carter's estate check cleared. Sandra also documented Marcus's movements over a 2-week surveillance period. He visited Tanya's house 4 times. He attended a Saturday morning baseball game for one of the boys. He was photographed in the backyard with both children, comfortable and relaxed in the way a man is only relaxed in a place he considers home. The report was 43 pages long. Diane read every word. But Sandra had found something else. Something that Diane had not asked for and was not prepared for, even though some part of her, the part that had absorbed Aunt Patricia's quiet warnings over the years, had perhaps always suspected it was there. When Sandra ran a full background profile on Marcus and his family, she pulled publicly available social media records, archived posts, and communications that had been screenshotted and shared within community groups. What emerged was a portrait of the Webb family's private sentiments that stood in sharp contrast to the warm, inclusive image Marcus had always projected. His mother, Renee Webb, had made a post on Facebook in 2014, 1 year into Marcus and Diane's marriage, referring to Diane in language that was dismissive and reductive in the way that certain racial condescension always is. Not a slur, not something legally actionable, but something that communicated clearly how Renee Webb categorized her daughter-in-law. The post had since been deleted, but not before it was captured. His brother Tyler had made comments in group texts that Sandra obtained through a contact that were more direct. Comments about Marcus's choices, about expectations, about what the family had assumed his life would look like. And Tanya Briggs was white. Diane sat with that for a long time. Not because it surprised her. She was a Black woman in America, and she had never had the luxury of being surprised by this particular revelation, but because it reframed 11 years in a way that was quietly devastating. The holidays where Renee Webb had been polite but never warm. The family photos where Diane was present but somehow peripheral. The way Marcus had always managed the relationship between Diane and his family with a careful, practiced distance that she had always attributed to his personality, his privacy, his old-fashioned family. She understood now that the distance had not been personal. It had been structural. She had been the relationship Marcus maintained while keeping another life, a life that fit a different set of expectations, fully intact 22 minutes away. The money that built Tanya's house, paid for Connor's baseball gear, covered Ryan's birthday parties. That money had come from Diane. A Black woman's income. A Black woman's credit score. A Black woman's inheritance from her mother. It had flowed, steadily and deliberately, for 9 years, into a life that people like Renee Webb considered more appropriate for her son. Aunt Patricia, when Diane eventually told her everything, sat across from her niece at the kitchen table in complete silence for a full 30 seconds. And then she said, very quietly, "I prayed I was wrong, baby. I prayed so hard I was wrong." She had not been wrong. Diane retained Renee Ashford in the 3rd week of May 2022. Renee was one of the most respected family law attorneys in Fulton County, a Black woman in her late 40s with 19 years of experience and a reputation in Atlanta legal circles for forensic financial work that left opposing counsel with very little room to maneuver. When Diane sat down across from Renee and laid out Sandra's report, the account records, the property documents, the archived screenshots, and the spreadsheet she had built herself, line by line, transfer by transfer, $247,000 accounted for to the dollar, Renee read through it without speaking. And when she was done, she looked at Diane and said, "This is one of the most thoroughly documented cases of marital financial abuse I have seen in 19 years of practice." Renee filed for divorce on a Monday. The grounds included marital waste, the legal term in Georgia for the intentional depletion of marital assets, as well as financial fraud and intentional misrepresentation. The $247,000 in transfers, along with the redirected inheritance funds and the documented cash withdrawals, were classified as marital asset dissipation. Under Georgia divorce law, when one spouse deliberately drains shared financial resources for their own benefit outside the marriage, the other spouse is entitled to compensation. Not just a split of what remains, but a disproportionate share of total assets to account for what was taken. Renee also filed an injunction preventing Marcus from accessing or moving any shared financial accounts pending the proceedings. Marcus, who had no idea the case was coming, found out when he was served papers at his office on a Tuesday morning in late May 2022. He came home that evening and found Diane in the kitchen. The children were at her Aunt Patricia's house. The folder was on the table, every document, the bank statements, Sandra's report, the property records, the screenshots of his mother's post and his brother's texts, the spreadsheet, and on top of it, a single photograph of Jordan and Nia taken at Easter, both of them laughing. Marcus sat down, and Diane gave him the folder. He tried to explain. He used the word complicated approximately 7 times. He said Tanya meant nothing, which was demonstrably untrue given that she had his children and his money and 12 years of his presence. He said the amount wasn't as significant as it looked, which was also demonstrably untrue given that Diane had counted every dollar. He said the situation with his family was something he had never known how to navigate, and that was possibly the most honest thing he said in the entire conversation, which made it the most enraging. Diane let him finish. She did not raise her voice, and then she said, "I am not here for an explanation, Marcus. I am here to tell you what happens next, and I need you to understand that I have already spoken to Renee Ashford, so whatever you say in the next 5 minutes, say it carefully." Marcus said very little after that. The divorce proceedings moved through the Fulton County court system over the following 5 months. Marcus retained an attorney, a man named Greg Saunders who came highly recommended and who, by the end of the case, was visibly struggling with the documentation Renee had assembled. Marcus's legal strategy shifted several times. First, he contested the financial fraud characterization. Then he attempted to argue that Tanya's account was a personal investment vehicle. Then, when Renee's forensic accountant dismantled that argument with 17 pages of transaction analysis, he pivoted to contesting the value of marital assets. None of it worked. The judge, in a ruling issued in October 2022, awarded Diane a disproportionate share of marital assets that accounted for the dissipated funds. She received the house, the one with the magnolia tree, the neighborhood with the community pool, and the 4th of July block party. She received primary custody of Jordan and Nia, with Marcus receiving supervised visitation pending a family court review of his circumstances. She received a financial judgment requiring Marcus to repay $180, zero directly to her estate, factoring in interest, legal costs, and a portion of Gloria's inheritance that the court characterized as a wrongfully diverted inheritance asset. Marcus's company had been monitoring the case through its public filings, as companies do when a regional manager becomes the subject of a financial fraud proceeding. In August 2022, 2 months before the final ruling, they conducted an internal audit of Marcus's expense account. The audit found irregularities going back 4 years. Marcus Webb was terminated in August 2022 with no severance. He lost the job, he lost the house, he lost primary access to his children, and in the painful, quiet aftermath of it all, he lost Tanya too, who had built her life on the understanding, however compromised, that Marcus would be there. With Marcus unemployed, under a financial judgment, and publicly exposed, that understanding evaporated. Karen Webb made no public statement. Tyler went quiet on social media. The Webb family, which had organized itself around a set of private expectations for Marcus's life, found that those expectations had produced a complete collapse. Diane Carter hosted Thanksgiving in November 2022, in the house with the magnolia tree. She cooked a full spread: turkey, dressing, collard greens, sweet potato pie. Jordan and Nia ran circles in the backyard while the adults sat on the back porch as the evening settled in. Aunt Patricia was there. Gloria's sister, Aunt Marlene, drove up from Macon. Brianna came the friend from the Stone Mountain cookout, the one who had insisted Diane show up that summer evening 12 years earlier. At some point in the evening, Aunt Patricia took Diane's hand on the porch and looked at her for a long moment. And Diane, who had held herself together through 9 months of the most sustained and disciplined effort of her life, let herself be held by that look. Aunt Patricia said, "You didn't just keep the house, Diane, you kept yourself." And that was true. That was the thing that mattered most. Not the judgment, not the house, not the public outcome or the legal victory or the fact that Marcus Webb had lost everything he had spent 9 years trying to maintain. What mattered was that Diane Carter, who had been told her whole life that she was nobody's consolation prize, who had built everything she had with her own 2 hands, who had signed her name on a piece of paper with a man who had spent 9 years treating her investment as a resource to be managed, had walked out of it still herself. Still whole. Still standing. What happened to Diane is not just a story about a cheating husband. It is a story about financial abuse, the quiet, methodical kind that operates invisibly inside the infrastructure of a marriage, in the gap between trust and verification. It is a story about how a strong, intelligent, accomplished woman can be deceived not because she was naive, but because she was trusting. And trust, in a marriage, is not a weakness. It is what a marriage is supposed to be built on. The failure was not Diane's. It is a story about money as a tool of control, and about what happens when the person that tool was used against decides to pick it up herself and use it back. It is a story about the particular weight that Black women in this country carry when they love across lines that were never as dissolved as they were told. When they pour their income and their credit and their inheritance and their mother's savings into a partnership and discover that the partnership was never equal, that the accounting was never honest, that the house they thought they were building together was being used to build something else entirely. And it is a story about what one woman with a phone camera, a private investigator, a sharp attorney, and 11 years of paying careful attention can do when she finally decides to use everything she knows. Marcus Webb thought the most dangerous thing that happened on that Thursday afternoon in April 2022 was Diane seeing that bank statement. He was wrong. The most dangerous thing that happened was Diane putting the papers back, picking up her pen, and keeping her face completely still. That was the moment the story ended for him. He just didn't know it yet. So let me ask you something before you go. If you had been sitting at that table, if you had seen what Diane saw in the middle of signing the biggest document of your life with your husband 3 feet away, what would you have done? Would you have kept signing? Would you have held it together long enough to take that photo? Or would you have walked out right there? There is no wrong answer. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because the truth always has a paper trail. And some women are very, very good at following it. If you are new here, welcome. We tell stories like this one every week. Real betrayal, real consequences, real women who came out on the other side. Hit that subscribe button so you do not miss what is coming next. Because next week, we are covering a story about a woman who discovered that her own sister had been living under her identity for 7 years. 7 years. And the way she found out, you are absolutely not going to see it coming. We will see you then.